Let me tell you something that nobody talks about. The people who actually keep the world running, they're invisible. They punch in before the sun comes up. They punch out after it goes down. They carry other people's empires on their backs and never once get a credit on the marquee. Anthony Hesse was one of those people. Logistics coordinator, single father, the man who made sure 10,000 packages landed in the right hands across 7 states every single night without fail. And on a Thursday in July, during the worst heat wave to hit the city in 40 years, Anthony stayed late. Not for overtime, not for a promotion, but because his 8-year-old son Leo needed a tablet charger from his desk to finish a school project on the solar system. That's it, a tablet charger. Because in Anthony's world, every extra minute at work was a minute stolen from Leo. He didn't linger. He didn't browse. He came to get what his son needed and leave. That was a plan. But the plan died the moment he saw the CEO's door open. Because Rose Mann's door was never open. Not at midnight. Not during the annual board reviews. Not during the quarter when they nearly lost everything. Rose Mann was the kind of woman who could stare down a room full of sharks in $1,000 suits and never blink. The press called her the Steel Orchid. She built Mann International from a regional freight carrier into a logistics empire worth $4 billion. She controlled the skyline. She owned the boardroom. And right now, at 12:14 in the morning, the Steel Orchid was sitting on her own floor, her back against the side of her desk, her designer blazer crumpled beside her, crying a way that made Anthony's chest physically hurt. Not delicate crying, not the kind people do for show. The kind that happens when a person has finally run completely out of road. He should have turned around. He knew that. I know that. But Anthony Hesse had a son, and he knew what it looked like when someone hit rock bottom. He stepped inside, and what he found on that floor changed both of their lives forever. Rose looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. In her hands, she held a document, and even from across the room, Anthony could read the red stamp across the top of it. Ethics violation, embezzlement, refer to board. She looked at him the way a drowning person looks at a stranger on a dock, and then she said something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand straight up. "Anthony," she whispered, "do you still have the keys to the world they forgot?" He didn't understand the question yet, but he would, very soon. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. It reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. Here's what Rose told Anthony in that office, and here's why every single word of it should make your blood run cold. Dominic Thorne, her chief rival, a man who had spent 11 years trying to crack open Mann International like a safe, had finally figured out his move. He didn't use lawyers. He didn't use a traditional hostile acquisition. He built a lie, a digital lie, a fabricated ethics report embedded with manipulated transaction records that made it look like Rose had been siphoning company funds into a private offshore account for 3 years running. The report was already in the hands of 4 board members. The emergency vote was scheduled for 7 a.m. In my opinion, this is one of the most terrifying things that can happen to a person in modern America, because the lie was digital and the truth was physical. The only records that could prove the real transaction trail, the analog ledgers that Rose had kept by hand, old school, as a personal audit practice her late father had insisted on, were not in this building. They were in the hollows locked in the basement of an old shipping warehouse that Mann International had quietly owned and abandoned years ago. And here's the part that made Anthony's stomach drop. Rose's own corporate security detail had been compromised. Dominic had paid 2 of her top 3 bodyguards before she even knew a move was being made. She couldn't call the police without tipping Dominic's contacts in the department. She couldn't use her corporate car because the GPS was logged and monitored. She couldn't send anyone else because the only person left in the building at midnight, the only soul she actually trusted, because he had no stake in the politics, no angle to play, no reason to lie, was Anthony Hesse. Anthony didn't say yes right away, because he's smart, and because he had Leo to think about. "You understand what you're asking me," he said. It wasn't a question. Rose met his eyes. "I understand what I'm asking. I wouldn't ask if there was another way." He thought about Leo asleep at his sister's apartment across town. He thought about his job, his mortgage, his record, not criminal, but the kind of record a neighborhood like the Hollows puts on a man just by association. He had spent 15 years building a life outside that zip code, and now the most powerful woman in his professional world was asking him to go back. For her. He grabbed his car keys and said, "No Tesla. We take mine." Rose didn't argue, which told Anthony she was smarter than he had given her credit for. The drive to the Hollows took 22 minutes. In those 22 minutes, Anthony did something that nobody at Mann International had ever bothered to do. He told Rose the truth about what her shipping routes actually looked like from the ground level. He told her about the families in zip codes like the Hollows who waited on delivery windows, because those packages sometimes contain medication. He told her about the warehouses in these neighborhoods that her company had closed without notice, wiping out jobs that took years to replace. "You see a zip code," he said, eyes on the road. "I see families waiting for the lights to stay on." Rose didn't respond immediately. She just looked out the window at streets she had never once driven down, and something behind her eyes shifted. I noticed in the story. That moment when a person stops defending their worldview and just absorbs reality for the first time. But they hadn't found the ledgers yet, and the night was about to turn in a direction neither of them saw coming. Anthony killed the headlights 2 blocks from the warehouse. Old habit. In the Hollows, you learn early that visibility is a choice, and making yourself visible at the wrong moment costs you. He called this the rules of the invisible. Rule 1, never walk in a straight line near a corner. Rule 2, know which cameras actually work and which ones are just props. Rule 3, move like you belong, because hesitation is what draws eyes. Rose listened to every word. And here's what I found remarkable about that moment. She didn't bristle. She didn't say, "I'm a CEO, I don't do this." She treated Anthony's knowledge like it was exactly what it was: expertise, earned, real, irreplaceable, because the education system will teach you accounting and economics. But no MBA program on the planet teaches you how to move through a city that wasn't built for you. The ledgers were exactly where Rose said they would be, beneath a false floor panel in the rear storage corridor of the old warehouse, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in a waterproof case that smelled like her father's office. Anthony held the flashlight. Rose's hands shook as she pulled them out. There were 6 of them. 12 years of handwritten records. Every transaction, every wire, every signature that proved Dominic's fabricated report was built on sand. In my honest opinion, there's something deeply poetic about the fact that the thing that was going to save a $4 billion digital empire was 6 books written by hand. Sometimes the old world is the only thing that can correct the new one. They had what they came for. Anthony exhaled. For approximately 4 seconds, he allowed himself to believe the hard part was over. Then the warehouse filled with light. White light exploded through every window. Anthony grabbed Rose's arm without thinking. 6 spotlights, mounted on SUVs, parked in a ring around the building. And then came the voice, measured, calm, and colder than the night air. Mr. Hesse. The megaphone made Dominic Thorne's voice sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. I want to commend your resourcefulness tonight. Truly, not many people would risk this much for someone who doesn't even know their last name. A pause. Calculated. But here's where we are. My team has a live feed of your son's bedroom. Leo is asleep. He looks peaceful. I'd like him to stay that way. Hand over the books to the front entrance. Just set them down and walk away. And everyone goes home safe. Keep them, and you and Ms. Mann simply disappear. The city is very large, Mr. Hesse. Very easy to get lost in. Anthony's jaw tightened. Rose looked at him. The ledgers were pressed between them. And Anthony Hesse, the man who was just a cog, said nothing. He was calculating something. Because something in Dominic's threat didn't add up. And if he was right about what it was, they still had a chance. But if he was wrong, listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens next. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never hear any other amazing stories from me. Here's what Anthony had caught. The detail that Dominic hadn't expected a logistics coordinator to notice. The hollows ran on a neighborhood relay tower for cellular and data signals. Anthony had helped his old friend Marcus file a complaint about that relay 3 years ago. The relay had a documented, city-verified 12-second delay on any live transmission in that corridor. Dominic claimed to have a live feed of Leo's room. But if the feed was running through the local relay, there was a 12-second lag. That wasn't a live feed. That was a recording. Dominic was bluffing. Anthony was almost certain. Almost. I need you to trust me, he breathed into Rose's ear. Not as my boss. As a person. Can you do that? Rose looked at the floor for exactly 2 seconds. Yes, she said. And she meant it. Anthony had played in these tunnels as a kid. Every child in the Hollows knew about the freight tunnels, a network of underground passages that connected the old warehouse district to the loading corridors beneath the municipal rail yard 6 blocks north. They hadn't been used for freight in 30 years. They were narrow. They smelled like old iron and wet concrete. And there was exactly one working path through them if you didn't know the layout. Anthony knew every single turn. He moved the shelving unit with practiced efficiency, revealing the tunnel hatch. Rose looked at the opening, looked at him, and without a word, she went in first. That said everything about who she actually was under the title. They moved through darkness. No flashlight after the first 30 seconds. Because light bleeds through great openings, and Dominic's drones were directly above. And outside, above them, Dominic's operation was unraveling, because Anthony had made 2 calls before they left the corporate building. 2 calls to men who owed him nothing except loyalty, which in the Hollows is the same as owing everything. Marcus and Deshawn, 2 men who had driven freight and warehouse worked their whole lives. 2 men who, when Anthony sent a single 3-word text, old rules, tonight, understood exactly what was being asked. 3 trucks, 1 intersection, a blockade that Dominic's imported security team, for all their night vision gear and surveillance drones, could not explain, could not move, and could not legally override without involving the exact police presence Dominic had been trying to avoid all night. Community beat capital. It wasn't even close. But Dominic Thorne was still standing outside that warehouse with a megaphone in a fury that was about to become very personal. They came up in the rail yard at 2:47 a.m. Cold air, open sky, no spotlights. Anthony checked his phone. 3 texts from Marcus confirming the blockade was holding and Dominic's team was pulling back. He exhaled for the second time that night. Rose sat on the edge of a rail tie and looked at the ledgers in her hands. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something Anthony didn't expect. Not, "Thank you." Not, "I'll compensate you." She said, "My father built this company delivering freight out of a neighborhood 2 miles from here. I think I forgot that somewhere." Anthony looked at her. "Most people do," he said. "That's why they need someone like me to remind them." She almost smiled. Almost. Dominic was waiting in the lobby. Of course he was. Men like Dominic always want to watch their wins in person. He looked at Rose. He looked at the ledgers. And for just a fraction of a second, Anthony watched the confidence drain out of Dominic Thorne's face the way water drains from a cracked glass. Slowly at first, then all at once. "You can't stop the vote," Dominic said. His voice was still measured. "Just barely. The board has already seen the report." Rose set the ledgers on the marble reception desk with a sound like a gavel. "Then they'll see the truth in 45 minutes, she said. "And then they'll see you leave." Dominic looked at Anthony. Anthony met his eyes and said nothing, because some things don't need words. The 4 a.m. emergency board meeting lasted 90 minutes. Anthony waited outside. He sat in a hallway chair, and he thought about Leo, still asleep across town, unbothered by any of this. He thought about the fact that in 12 years of working at Mann International, nobody on that board had ever learned his last name. And he thought about what Rose had said, that her father had started 2 miles from the Hollows. Sometimes the distance between where we start and where we end up becomes the very thing that blinds us to the people who keep us standing. Inside that boardroom, the ledgers did what the truth always does when it's given the room to speak. They dismantled the lie, line by line, entry by entry, until there was nothing left of Dominic Thorne's $4 billion fiction. He was removed from any further proceedings before the sun came up. 3 weeks after that night, Rose Mann stood before every employee of Mann International, from the C-suite down to the dock loaders, and announced something that sent shockwaves through the business press for weeks. She was restructuring the company as an employee ownership trust. Every worker, from the senior coordinators to the overnight freight handlers, would receive equity, a stake, a real financial share in the thing they have been keeping alive with their invisible labor. The press called it radical. I'd call it overdue, because here's the real education in this story. The people who build a machine have always deserved a seat at the table. The only thing that changes is when the person at the top finally gets honest enough to admit it. But the biggest surprise wasn't the trust. It was what Rose did next. She stepped down, voluntarily. The Steel Orchid, the woman who owned the Skyline, resigned from the company she had built, and she did it without drama. She issued a single statement. In it, she said that the events of one night had clarified something she had been running from for years. That leadership means nothing if it requires you to lose connection with the humans who make it possible. And then she announced where she was going. The Hollows Neighborhood Resource Center. Director of Operations. No salary listed. Anthony Hesse did not get $1 million. He did not get a corner office makeover or a celebrity profile or a viral news segment. He got a letter, handwritten, from Rose. In it, She told him that she was recommending him, and only him, for the newly created position of head of ethics at Mann International. Not because he was the most credentialed candidate, but because he was the only person in the building who had proven, under real pressure, that his values couldn't be bought, threatened, or broken. He accepted, and on his first morning in the executive office, he brought Leo's solar system project from home and set it on the former CEO's desk. Leo had gotten a perfect score. Anthony figured that deserved the best view in the building. Here's what the story teaches us, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. We live in a world that has become obsessed with digital power, algorithms, surveillance systems, data manipulation, AI-driven finance. We have built extraordinary machines, but we have made a catastrophic assumption along the way. We have assumed that the people who operate those machines are replaceable, that the warehouse worker, the freight coordinator, the overnight logistics ghost, that these people are just variables in a spreadsheet. This story says otherwise. When Dominic Thorne's entire digital operation, his drones, his surveillance, his fabricated data, was brought to its knees, it wasn't by a counter-algorithm. It wasn't by a more expensive security team. It was by a man who knew which cameras actually worked. By 2 men with 3 trucks. By 6 handwritten books. By relationships that couldn't be hacked because they weren't stored on any server. The lesson is this: a fortress is only as strong as the people who build it, not the person who sits on the throne. And if you stripped away everything you own today, the title, the salary, the digital footprint, who would still be standing in the dark with you? That answer is your real net worth. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2 of Anthony, Rose, and Leo's story. What challenges will they face as the employee ownership trust reshapes the company? How will Dominic Thorne attempt his comeback? Let me know if you want to hear more.